What's good, everybody? It's Kurt from Triad Hip Hop Podcast, and I want to do another Black History version of our Lost in Thought segment. So today, I just want to talk about someone who we just recently lost, and her name is Katherine Johnson. She was actually some of you may have gotten to know about her from the recent movie in 2016, Hidden Figures. She was the character that Taraji P. Henson played, and she was such a major figure in Black history. And I have to admit, before the movie, I really didn't know much about her, but after I saw the movie, I went back and kind of chronicled and studied her life to learn more about her, and I just really, think she's unsung. She's not really heralded enough in society. So I want to just talk about her a little bit. And like I said, she just passed away yesterday, Monday, and so many people are going to be, in mourning now because of this. But she made it to the ripe age of 101. Okay, clap that up. How many people can say they've made it to 101? Okay, so, I just really want to take a moment to recognize that. So I was, in my studies, when they announced that she had died, found a good article that was done by the New York Times, and they kind of talked about her life, and I really like how they wrapped it up. So I'm going to read from that, but I'm also going to paraphrase a little bit, so I won't keep you because it's a pretty lengthy article. So let me pull it up here so I can read to you guys. And let's see here. Let's see. All right, so Miss Katherine Johnson, she calculated the precise trajectories that would let Apollo 11 land on the moon in 1969, and after Neil Armstrong's history-making moonwalk allowed it to return to Earth. And see, this is so important, and it says one thing is a single error that she well knew could have dire consequences for the craft and crew. So basically, she was the mathematician who pretty much made sure that they got where they were supposed to go, because when you're going somewhere like trying to go to space, you have to make sure this shit is calculated right. You have to make sure that everything is precise. And mathematics has never been my strong suit, but I do realize the importance of it, because when you're coming up in school, you don't realize the importance of math and calculations and accuracy and all that, but people like her really go to show you just how important it really is. So, because like I said, a single error in numbers could have thrown off their whole project, and then she would have, caused people to either get hurt or even lose their lives and stuff. Now she wasn't the only one working on it, but she was pretty much the one that locked it down and made sure that everything was right. Where other people couldn't figure out certain things, she was doing that because she actually had a love for math. So it says her impeccable calculations had already helped plot the successful flight of Alan B. Shepard Jr., who became the first American in space when his Mercury spacecraft went aloft in 1961. So this was the first man to go into space from America in 1961. The next year, which would have been 62, she also helped make it possible for John Glenn in the Mercury vessel Friendship 7 to become the first American to orbit the Earth. So he was the first one to travel full circle around the Earth while in orbit. And it says, yet, throughout Ms. Johnson's 33 years in NASA's Flight Research Division, the office from which the American space program sprang, and for decades afterward, almost no one knew her name. And that's really sad. You know what I mean? Somebody like that should be spoken of in every school textbook when it comes to history. Not African history, not anybody's history, just history, period. American history. So it says Miss Johnson was one of several hundred rigorously educated, supremely capable, yet largely unheralded women who, well before the modern feminist movement, worked as NASA mathematicians. But it was not only her sex that kept her long marginalized and long unsung. Katherine Coleman Goebel Johnson, a West Virginia native who began her scientific career in the Jim Crow era, was also African American. In old age, Miss Johnson became more celebrated of the small cadre of black women, perhaps 3 dozen, who at mid-century served as mathematicians for the space agency and its predecessor, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. Their story was told in the 2016 Hollywood film Hidden Figures, based on Margot Lee Shetterly's nonfiction book of the same title, published that same year. The movie starred Taraji P. Henson as Mrs. Johnson, the film's central figure. It also starred Octavia Spencer and Janelle Monáe as her real-life colleagues, Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson. In January 2017, Hidden Figures received the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Cast in Motion Picture. The film was nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Picture, though it won none. The 98-and-a-half-year-old at the time, Mrs. Johnson, received a sustained standing ovation when she appeared on stage with the cast at the Academy Awards ceremony that February. Of the black women at the center of the film, Miss Johnson was the only one still living at the time of its release. And by then, she had become the best-known member of her formerly unknown cohorts. In 2015, President Barack Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, proclaiming, and I quote, "Katherine G. Johnson refused to be intimidated by society's expectation of her gender and race, while expanding the boundaries of humanity's reach." In 2017, NASA dedicated a building in her honor called the Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Facility at its Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia. That year, the Washington Post described her as the quote-unquote the most high profile of the computers. Because, see, that's what they called people back then, computers, because they were computing. So they called her the most high profile of the computers, being the term originally used to designate Mrs. Johnson and her colleagues, much as typewriters, quote unquote, was used in the 19th century to denote professional typists. She helped our nation enlarge the frontiers of space, NASA's Administrator Jim Bridenstine said in a statement on Monday, even as she made huge strides that also opened the doors for women and people of color in the universal human quest to explore space. As Mrs. Johnson herself was fond of the saying, her tenure at Langley, which was from 1953 until her retirement in 86, was a time when computers wore skirts. I love that, man. I love that. That was one of her famous sayings. That was a time when computers wore skirts. For some years at mid-century, the black women who worked as computers were subjected to a double segregation, consigned to separate offices, dining, and bathroom facilities. They were kept separate from the much larger group of white women who also worked as NASA mathematicians. The white women, in turn, were segregated from the agency's male mathematicians and engineers. So, number one, if you were a woman, you were going to be segregated from the men. And then, if you were a black woman, you were not only segregated from the men, you were also segregated from the white women. So it's just really sad, that they went so far out of their way to do shit like this. But let's move on. But over time, the work of Mrs. Johnson and her colleagues, myriad calculations done mainly by hand using slide rules, graph paper, and clattering desktop calculating machines, won them a level of acceptance that for the most part transcended race. And I quote, "NASA was a very professional organization," Ms. Johnson said when she told the Observer of Fayetteville, North Carolina in 2010. She said, "They didn't have time to be concerned about what color I was." Nor, she said, did she. And then she said, "I don't have a feeling of inferiority," Mrs. Johnson said on at least one occasion. "Never had. I'm as good as anybody, but no better." To the end of her life, Ms. Johnson deflected praise for her role in sending astronauts into space, keeping them on course and bringing them safely home. And she said, and I quote, "I was just doing my job." Ms. Shetterly heard her saying repeatedly in the course of researching her book. So basically, people have always tried to give her enormous amounts of praise, and she basically said, "I don't need that. I was just doing my job." And, I didn't look at it as, I'm the black girl here struggling. I just, they gave me an opportunity and I did it, and I treated it as such. It was just my job. So I love that about her. And, it says, "But what a job it was, done no less by a woman born at a time," Miss Shetterly wrote, "when the odds were more likely that she would die before the age of 35 than even finishing high school." The odds were more likely that she would die before age 35 than even finishing high school. What kind of odds are those? Creola Katherine Coleman was born on August 26, 1918 in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, the youngest of 4 children of Joshua and Joylette Lowe Coleman. Her mother was a school teacher, her father a farmer. From her earliest childhood, Katherine counted things, like the number of dishes in the cupboard, the number of steps on the way to church, and as insurmountable a task as it might pose for someone old enough to be daunted, the number of stars in the sky. So that's how she really just had a love for mathematics, because she's always just counting stuff. And here's a quote. It says, I couldn't wait to get to high school to take algebra and geometry." How many of us can say that? She told that to the Associated Press in 1999. But for black children, the town's segregated educational system went as far as only the 6th grade. Thus, every fall, Joshua Coleman moved his family 125 miles away to Institute, West Virginia. Wow. So people of color were only allowed to go as far as the 6th grade. The 6th grade, that's it. And if you think about what children are learning these days in the 6th grade versus what they were just learning in the 6th grade when I grew up, it's a whole different ball game. They're getting way more information now than even when I did when I was a kid. So it says, in the city of Institute, Katherine's older siblings and then Katherine attended the high school associated with the West Virginia College Institute, a historically black institution that became West Virginia State College and is now West Virginia State University. Ms. Coleman remained in White Sulphur Springs her father, Mr. Coleman, remained in White Sulphur Springs to farm, and when the Depression made farming untenable, to work as a bellman at the Greenbrier, which was a world-renowned resort there. So basically, he had his own farm, did a bunch of farming, And when the Depression hit real hard, he had to become a bellman at a Greenbrier Hotel resort. Katherine entered high school at age of 10 and graduated at 14. You know what? Hold on. Let me say that again. Katherine entered high school at the age of 10 and graduated at the age of 14. What? The next year, she entered West Virginia State. By her junior year, she had taken all the math courses the college had to offer. Her mentor there, William Waldron Shiflin Clater, only the third black person to earn a doctorate in mathematics from an American university, conceived special classes just for her. And I quote, "You would make a good research mathematician," he told his then 17-year-old charge. And I quote, "And I'm going to prepare you for this career." So you see what I'm saying? It takes a village, and it takes people like that to spot something in you, and not only spot something in you, but say, "I'm going to help you get there." We have nothing, hardly nothing going on like that anymore. Now, we do have it, but it's so small, it's ridiculous. You know, when I grew up, there was a lot more people trying to help you and encourage you and be there for you. And nowadays, so many people just have this "you're on your own" mentality. It's crazy. And she said to him, "Where will I find a job?" And then he replied, "That will be your problem." After graduating summa cum laude in 1937 with a double major in mathematics and French, she found, unsurprisingly, that research opportunities for black female teenage mathematicians were negligible. She took a job as a school teacher in Marion, Virginia. In 1940, she was chosen by the president of West Virginia State to be one of 3 black graduate students to integrate West Virginia University, the then all-white institution in Morgantown. Wow. 2 years earlier, ruling in the civil rights case, Missouri ex rel. Gaines versus Canada, the United States Supreme Court held that where comparable graduate programs did not exist at black universities in Missouri, the state was obliged to admit black graduate students to its white state universities. In the wake of that decision, West Virginia's governor, Homer Holt, chose to desegregate public graduate schools in his state. You see how a ripple effect that this has when one person does, something that nobody else is wanting to do? You know what I mean? She got them to, for one, when it came to the point where her schools couldn't accommodate what she needed, they had to allow the white schools to allow segregation for her to be able to learn. And then because of that, the governor in a whole nother area said, "You know what? I want to desegregate all schools in my area so that everybody can just go to any school they want to." Excuse me. And I mean, that's how it should be. That's really how it should be. So, let me go back to where I finished off. So now, married to James Francis Goebel, a chemistry teacher, she entered West Virginia University in the summer of 1940, studying advanced mathematics. And I quote, "The greatest challenge she faced," which is, this was said by Miss Shetterly, "was finding a course that didn't duplicate Dr. Clater's meticulous tutelage." But after that summer session, on discovering she was pregnant with her first child, Katherine Johnson withdrew. She was Goebel then. She withdrew from the university. She returned with her husband to Marion and was occupied with marriage, motherhood, and teaching for more than a decade. And now enter NASA. So then in 1952, Katherine Goebel heard that Langley was hiring black women as mathematicians. The oldest of NASA's field centers, Langley, had been established by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics in 1917 In 1935, it began hiring white women with mathematics degrees to to relieve its male engineers of some of the tedious work of crunching numbers by hand. Within a decade, several hundred white women had been employed as computers there. Most unlike the male scientists at the agency were classified as sub-professionals and paid less than their male counterparts. So here you see, the white women who were finally allowed to come in there as mathematicians were paid significantly less than their male counterparts for doing the same type of work. So, it's sad that this was still going on, to this day. In 2020, this is still an issue where women are not being paid the same as what men would get for doing the same job. It blows my mind. In June 1941, as the nation prepared for war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, barring racial discrimination in the defense industry, which to me it also blows my mind. A president had to sign an executive order to stop racial discrimination in the defense industry. You can't put a stop to something unless it was allowed to start. And, it's really sad that they were allowed to officially discriminate against people under the law. Under the law. So I don't know. It just blows my mind. But anyway, in 1943, with the wartime need for human computers greater than ever, the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory, as the research facility was then known, began advertising for black women who were trained in mathematics. Among the first hired was Dorothy Vaughan, who began work that year in 1951. Ms. Vaughan became the first black section head at NACA, which is NACA, as the advisory committee was known, when she was officially placed in charge of Langley's West Area Computing Unit, the segregated office to which the black women were relegated. It was in this unit that Katherine Goebel began work in June 1953, tabulating sheets of data for the agency's engineers. By the time she arrived, the company cafeteria had already undergone de facto desegregation. Its quote-unquote colored computer sign designating a table in the back for the women had been salubrious casualty of the war years. But the separate bathrooms still remain. Quite by accident, Katherine Goebel broke that color line herself while the agency's bathrooms for black employees were marked as such. Many bathrooms for whites were unmarked. Without realizing it, she had been using a white women's restroom since her arrival, and by the time she became aware of her error, she was set in her routine and declined to change. That's what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? By the time she was made aware that, hey, you've been using the white people bathroom, she was like, you know what? This is what I've been doing, so this is what I'm going to keep doing. So, 2 weeks into her new job, she was borrowed by the Flight Research Division, which occupied an immense hangar on the Langley grounds. There, the only black member of the staff, she helped calculate the aerodynamic forces on airplanes. For that task, as she quickly demonstrated, she came armed with an invaluable asset. Quote, the guys all had graduate degrees in mathematics, but they had forgotten all the geometry that they ever knew. This is what Katherine Johnson said to the Fayetteville Observer in that interview. And she said, I still remember mine, though. So basically, all these guys had graduated with these mathematics degrees, but because it wasn't that important to them, they had forgot a lot of the stuff that they even learned in school. But she was like, no, I still remember mine, because she really had a love for it. And I love that, man. It says she remained in that division for the rest of her career, which is where pretty much the Hidden Figures movie, I believe, takes place. By the early 1960s, with the United States provoked by Soviet prowess in space, NASA was under great pressure to launch an astronaut. It fell to the research division to do many of the associated calculations. And I quote, "Our assignment was the trajectory," Ms. Johnson said. As NASA got ready to put someone in space, they needed to know what the launch conditions were. It was our assignment to develop the launch window and determine where it was going to land. Their work was secret, at times even from the mathematicians themselves. "We were the pioneers of the space era," Ms. Johnson said to the Daily Press, a Virginia newspaper, in 1990. "You had to read Aviation Week to find out what you'd done." So basically, even what she was doing, she didn't know what she was doing. They just told her to do it, and she wouldn't even find out until later what it actually contributed to. She routinely logged 16-hour days, once falling asleep at the wheel of her car and waking up safe, providentially at the side of the road. But the work engaged her deeply, and she said, "I loved every single day of it. There wasn't one day when I didn't wake up excited to go to work." It helped sustain her throughout the death of her first husband from brain cancer, which was in 1956, leaving her at 38, a widow with 3 adolescent daughters. She married James A. Johnson, a United States Army captain, in 1959, which was 3 years later. Over the years, Ms. Johnson published more than 24 technical papers. She was among the first women at NASA to be named author or co-author of an agency report. Ceaselessly curious about the aerospace technology that underpinned her work, she made it possible for women to attend the agency's scientific briefings, formerly closed-door affairs, reserved for male staffers. And I quote, "Is there a law against it?" Ms. Johnson asked. And when her male colleagues, after some head-scratching, concluded that no, there was no law, they let her in. And y'all know that from the movie, because that was the part when they kept going into them big meetings. And she kept saying, "Hey, if I'm going to be able to do this work, I need to know what y'all talking about in those meetings." And so once they finally realized, well, I guess there's no law, we might as well let her in. Because they try to keep it a boys' club, and it's ridiculous. If you're not getting shit done, and you know somebody else knows how to get shit done, let them get shit done. So, after retiring from NASA, Ms. Johnson became a public advocate for mathematics education, speaking widely and visiting schools. Her death was announced by NASA. She is survived by 2 daughters, Joylette Heilich and Catherine Moore, 6 grandchildren, and 11 great-grandchildren. Another daughter, Connie Garcia, who died in 2010. Her second husband, James Johnson, just died in 2019. And that was the one from the movie. Ms. Johnson's colleagues, Mary Jackson, died in 2005. Dorothy Vaughan died in 2008. An autobiography by Ms. Johnson for young readers called "Reaching for the Moon" was published just last year. In 2016, Ms. Johnson, self-effacing as ever at 98, seemed somewhat indifferent to the fuss surrounding the feature film about her life. So basically, she knew about the Hidden Figures film, but she wasn't really, that excited about it, for her. And she said, "I shudder," she told the New York Times that September, some 3 months before the film's release, having heard that the screenwriters might have made her character seem a tiny bit aggressive. And she said, "I was never actually aggressive." So as things transpired, Ms. Johnson liked the finished film very much, Ms. Shetterly said in an interview for this obituary in 2017. So basically, once she saw the movie, she really did like it, but at first she was kind of indifferent. She wasn't really sure how to feel and didn't really make a big deal out of it. But once she saw it, says that she was very happy with it. So I'm glad to hear that, because you don't want a movie that's going to chronicle, part of your life, that you're not satisfied with. You know what I mean? You want it to at least give it the feel of what really happened, so I'm happy that she was happy with it. Miss Johnson may not have been aggressive, but she was assuredly esteemed. An index of just how esteemed she was came from Mr. Glenn Mercury, astronaut and future United States Senator, who died in 2016. In early 1962, a few days before he prepared to orbit the Earth in Friendship 7, Mr. Glenn made a final check of his planned orbital trajectory. The trajectory had been generated by a computer, not the flesh and blood kind, but the electronic sort, which were starting to supplant the agency's human calculators. So basically, he knew that the trajectory and all the calculations were done by computers and not actually by human. So he was looking at it like, I don't know if I can trust this. You know what I mean? So he asked Miss Johnson to double check the machine's figures by hand, and he said, if she says the numbers are good, I'm ready to go. And so I think that part was chronicled in the movie as well. So that, I think, is such an amazing, story about her. And, I like that they really delve deep into her life and the surrounding parts of her life and her family and all that good stuff. So, I want to say, congratulations to all the women who participated in this, especially those women of color who paved the way for other women of color to be able to, cross that threshold into parts of the world that we would have never been able to do, because somebody was willing to stand up and for what they love and keep pushing for what they love, and didn't make bones about it, just worked hard and allowed herself to be not only respected, but to be needed and sought after. Because when you're good at your job, when you're efficient, proficient, all that good stuff, you don't have to wonder, is somebody going to want me? Is somebody going to need me? They're just going to need you, because your work is going to speak for itself. And I love that she didn't make any bones about that. She was just like, I know what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing, and I'm good at what I'm doing. I'm the best at what I'm doing. And she never, tried to make a big deal out of that. She was just, it was so good that people couldn't help but say, we need you. You know what I mean? If you saw the movie, there was a part when they came to her toward the end and said, hey, they're getting rid of the program, so we don't need you anymore. The computers are going to take over. And she had to deal with that. And she was, it was sad, but she dealt with it. But next thing you know, here they come running right behind her. Hey, we doing something, and we don't know if we're doing it right. Can you help? Because they know computers are not perfect. They may be fast, but they're still not perfect, and they can make mistakes. So, my condolences go out to her family, especially her children who have lost their mother. I'm sure they're well into adulthood now. With her being 101, I'm sure they're well into age, and I hope that they live long, prosperous, just long, prosperous, education-filled lives. Because if they're anything like her, I'm sure they love what they've learned in life, and they're trying to pass that on to others. So my condolences again to her family. I thank y'all for listening to me. Let's celebrate these people while they're alive, and let's give them their flowers now before they're gone, before it's too late. Two of those women that were portrayed in that movie did not get to see this, and they were just like her, virtually unknown before this movie. So I'm glad that somebody took the time and said, you know what, these women need to be talked about. These women need to be heard. These women need to be seen. you know, and it came out very well in the movie. So that movie I would recommend to anybody of any color and even children, because they need to know, you know, how far we've come and what we've been through. So anyway, for Try It Hip Hop Podcast, this has been Kurt with a Lost in Thought segment, and happy Black History Month. Thanks for listening. Peace.